Many of the things that they'd argue about, if were true, that we learn about later in life based on the lyrics of these artists, kept conversations going between them for weeks and even months, depending on how interested an artist was. I wanted to be in. Now, my brother's boombox made tapes of his favorite artists, songs, like mixtapes, which is today basically people call those playlists on your mobile devices, iPods, with iPod of your iPad, man, y'all know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the back in the day when we were younger, uh, people my age were younger. Uh, on the boombox, people made mixtapes, which today are called playlists. So on my brother's boombox, he made mixtapes. Once he made a lot of those, what I did was I started to be able to take those tapes and say hi so that I could listen to them and learn. Now, instead of listening to Sesame Street songs, this is what I began to listen to. NWA, Eazy-E, Public Enemy, Rob Bass, Slick Rick, Big Daddy Kane, Gang Starr, Run DMC, Ice-T, Boogie Down Production, Too Short, Salt and Pepper, MC Lyte, Ghetto Boys, The DOC, Queen Latifah, LL Cool J, and Sir Mix-a-Lot, to name a few. Now, my brother liked what they called real rap. This basically meant the artists told real stories in their songs. My brother would only continue to subscribe to an artist's music if he believed the stories they told, or if the message in some of an artist's songs felt true to him, or what he wanted to do or become. They also had to have the ability to lose you in a rhyme by making you pay attention to the words they chose to use in particular spots, to let their audience know they made a regular practice of learning words. My brother and my cousins were all talking so fast about all these rappers and their songs. Since my brother's favorite music was on mixtapes that he'd play outside for everyone to hear, the tapes that he hadn't messed up making those mixtapes with the full albums, I'd borrow those or take them without him noticing. This was how I'd managed to keep up with their conversation. I could read at 3, so by the time Eazy-E's album came out, I was already familiar with his act by listening to NWA. By the time the Ghetto Boys' Grip It on That Other Level came out, there was a theme developing in hip hop. Some of the rappers talk like they've been crowned as the best trying to keep their title. Others talk like they wanted the respect that came with being like a contender to be the best. Then there was the group that I'd eventually take a liking to, which was the ones offering a word to help teach somebody something or to inspire someone to want to learn something. Back then, though, the goal was for me to learn how to say more words to participate in discussions with the older kids. And the way that Eazy-E used what I learned were called curse words was fascinating to me. At 3, I obviously could not understand the messages in hip hop yet, but how they placed their curse words was what helped me develop a command of the English language. I needed to learn how to say the words all the kids older than me were afraid to say around adults to make the bigger kids hear me. Once I saw that worked, I began to listen to rap tapes in my Big Bird toy every night to learn how to talk like the rappers. Can you imagine the mind and behavior of a 4-year-old listening to NWA and Eazy-E as bedtime music? All right, so in finding an alternative use for my Big Bird toy, many of my cousins accused me of being a bad child, especially when some of the adults would hear me speak some of these words, since I recite many phrases in the same cadence as those rappers would. I say things in the presence of many adults that did not listen to hip hop, who didn't understand I'd said anything a child shouldn't be saying. I did not get into trouble because the adults didn't know if I was babbling or talking that many times in that voice. But my cousins and brother could understand what I was saying and doing. Instead of them being encouraged by how quickly I was learning these words, they became embarrassed I wasn't afraid to show what I knew. They thought by allowing me to discover this music that they'd be in trouble for it. And they was right. Hip hop encouraged me to listen. As someone speaks words to you, you say them to yourself as they register for someone to understand how to respond in the interaction. When someone listens in that way, it is a form of reading. Reading isn't only done on a page. Once I learned that these rappers wrote the stuff that they said on these tapes, before or after it was said on record, I had to find it to see these words. This was when I began to read album covers. Some artists would illustrate their lyrics in album covers, like on the art. Some artists would provide stories about themselves to offer better understanding for their project. Almost like a magazine article offering answers without any questions being asked. It offered insight to them. Because of my brother's music taste, I developed a certain callus. Regardless of the language being used or the tone of speech, I could hear when someone was crying because I was developing an understanding of words through the work my mom was putting in with me. As I matured and was allowed to start building my own hip hop collection through making my own mixtapes from my brother's collection and using our local radio shows, the songs that I liked were those of real rap like my brother. However, I developed a habit of listening to the full body of work, not only a few songs from an artist's project. What I began to notice was a formula in how they made their albums. It seemed like many hip hop artists would have at least 3 songs that did not go with the rest of their project. It was explained to me that those were singles or radio songs. I began to notice I did not like most of the hip hop artists' radio songs. I like hearing the songs that their bosses would try to suppress, which was where these artists were telling their stories. This reminded me of stories I hear in church on Sundays about those left behind, lost, forgotten about, etc., that could find God's favor if they kept their faith. What I was hearing in hip hop began to sound like prayers. They sounded like prayers from someone that wasn't taught how to speak to God by anyone in any church. It seemed like they were talking about their prayers, telling people how they talk to God. Some of them sounded to be praying and didn't know they were, but they were doing this in a way that made people want to hear how they were able to seemingly talk to God or have Him speak through them, through their talents. Since I was taught that we all have a right and responsibility to have a relationship with God, without knowing it, my spirit began to be moved towards finding God in hip hop. I'm not indicating that all hip hop is godly, but I believe we're all God's children. Like many of God's children, we find ourselves lost at times. In those times, many of God's children have made a mark to let others know where they were in their route to help others not be lost for as long as they were. My family was in the church in my beginning years, but they and we eventually decided to stop going to church. I was aware of the Word of God by those that had a relationship with Him in my family that were close to me. So I always maintained a great respect and fear of the Lord, although I didn't know Him. I believe that the people praying over my life helped me find God in this music because I did not begin to consciously and intentionally read the Bible until I was about to turn 40. Before, I read parts of the Bible, but I've not ever been this focused on it like what I've been over the past 6 months. It's blown my mind what I already knew about the foundation and what I knew by the foundation set by my elders within me. But in reading the Bible, what has been most fascinating are the things that have happened in my life. Stay tuned. I'll be sharing as I read more.